Goodbye.
Life passing me by, not thinking how the years have flown until I met you.
There are a few games that leave me with an emptiness when you have finally gotten to the end of an experience and you see the credits roll on a journey you spent hours and days in coming to an end. However, not many come close to that feeling more than the Final Fantasy franchise. And Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was especially one journey I didn't want to see come to an end. And now that the conversation around it has settled down a bit since launch, I want to go over what made this game stand out. But even more so, what Remake Part 3 can learn from Rebirth going forward to not only potentially be the best Final Fantasy in the series, but a game that inspires the industry in general as the series used to. Before we continue forward, do not forget to like the video and subscribe for any JRPG news or anything JRPG related. But anyways, let's get on to the video. I look back on my time with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth very fondly. Everything in the world and characters felt so new, yet so familiar to the same experiences and emotions I had as a 9-year-old boy just barely figuring out how to play this game. If Remake set the stage for what was to come, then Rebirth was the game to show what this Remake trilogy was really capable of. The first time stepping out into the plains of the open world and hearing that overworld music again. It's that exact moment where I knew Rebirth was going to be an experience I couldn't forget. This game did so many things right that really just made the first part of the remake look like a tech demo in comparison. For instance, I think many people thought that Rebirth wasn't going to have an open world, but more of an open zoned approach, which at the time felt like the safest option to go for. And it came to everyone's surprise when we found out that the game had large interconnected zones, pretty much feeling like an open world but not as overwhelmingly huge as what you would see in a true open world experience. There was so much that was significantly improved from part 1. The scope was much larger than anything we had seen in Remake, and that also reflects the original game very well when first stepping out into the world. However, even though there is a lot of good in this game, there's also a lot that I really didn't enjoy and things that could have been approached differently. The story for Rebirth was really a mixed bag for me, because while I did enjoy it and I think there is a lot that it does very well, there were also times where the story just completely took me out of it because of certain ways they approached the narrative in comparison to the original. And let me be clear that I understand this is a remake, or more so a reimagining of events from the original, so not everything is going to be completely one for one. However, I am still going to compare it to the original as this is still based off of that game. I think the biggest outlier here when it comes to Rebirth is the famous Aerith death scene, which isn't surprising when you consider that this ending is pretty divisive amongst the fanbase. Now, for me personally, I didn't hate the scene, but I didn't love it either. The thing is, nothing in Rebirth's adaptation do I think this scene does anything better than the original. I mean, this is one of the most iconic scenes in gaming history, where I was supposed to have that emotional impact of losing a friend we have spent so long on this journey with. I almost felt none of that here. But that's the point, and it's intentional and why I feel mixed on it, because I don't exactly hate it. I think the one thing that the scene does get so right is communicating how broken Cloud really is as a character. How Cloud constantly wants to see Aerith alive, yet everyone around him doesn't. It only further reinforces Cloud's characterization and communicates to the player that Cloud is mentally unstable. I mean, the Remake trilogy has always done a great job with characterization, but with Cloud especially in this scene, I think it is outstanding. Though I would be lying if I said I still wasn't taken out instead of being in the moment on my first playthrough. I didn't really get that emotional weight my first time around, which is why I still remained mixed. I was left with confusion as to what was even happening instead of the emotional impact that the original scene had. It is why it's one of the most conflicting areas of the game for me personally, because while I didn't hate what they were going for, it is hard to let go of what made something so special in the first place while trying to accept a new take on something so beloved. I think it is absolutely fine to admit that you are mixed on something that you don't exactly love or hate, as that's really how I feel here. Rebirth's ending does do a great job of setting the stage for the third game, and how we get there is ultimately still the same as the original, just with a lot more multiverse shenanigans as we already know. It's an ending that sets up some very interesting plot points that part 3 will probably blow our minds with in ways that we couldn't have expected, like how all of the different worlds that were fully revealed to us by Sephiroth will come into play. How will this black materia that Cloud has affect the party and his actions, as he's even more unhinged than ever before. But most importantly, what role will Aerith play in part 3? We know she is definitely going to come back in some form or fashion. We've seen a version of her give white materia to Cloud, and yet another version of her appears to defeat Sephiroth. So already, Rebirth has given us a glimpse at what's to come going forward. But that brings up the question of how exactly are they going to bring Aerith back? Now, in my honest opinion, I don't see any other way they can bring our original Aerith back without it feeling cheap or unnecessary. I think it's a safer bet to say that a different version of Aerith will help us in part 3 just as she did at the end of Rebirth. Except this time, her presence will be a lot more prominent. There is a reluctance from me when it comes to Aerith being brought back, as in this point of the story, a lot of the character's growth comes from accepting loss. Accepting that she is gone and coming to terms with that. If she does end up coming back, even if it's just another version of her, how would that affect the actions of her characters, including Cloud? One thing is for sure in that they are absolutely going to subvert expectations again like they did for Rebirth. But in general, the story will really go to places that we couldn't even imagine. Even Hamaguchi says this himself in the Making of a Masterpiece panel.
Third game, the final game in the trilogy, I guarantee you it will beat any expectations you have on it, so look out for great things.
I think another thing that is going to be significantly different is the end goal with Sephiroth and how the reunion will play out. We know that throughout this whole thing, Cloud is really just being manipulated to bring the black materia to Sephiroth in the Northern Crater. The idea is that Sephiroth will create that one ideal reality where he controls the planet. No other alternate world would be able to stop him if this rejoining is complete. However, the one character that would be able to stop him in doing this would still be Aerith, just like in the original. Though I think this time around, Hamaguchi and the team really have something up their sleeves that is going to be so much more ambitious than before. At the end of the original, Aerith and the rest of the livestream came together to fight off Meteor after Holy had failed to do so. Aerith is that one character that Sephiroth has always wanted out of the way. Not Cloud, not anybody else, but Aerith. The Aerith in the Remake trilogy, however, I believe is far more powerful than she was in the OG. There are so many instances where she's just mysteriously talking to herself, but we as the player know better. Or how she just knows certain events about the story that haven't come to pass. It's clear that all of this was intentional with what we know about Sephiroth, the livestream, and how that connects with Aerith. She's so powerful in fact that even Sephiroth has underestimated her on multiple occasions, especially when looking at the ending of Rebirth. With all of the infinite worlds we know about now from Sephiroth, I do think that the Aeriths from the other worlds are going to be extremely vital come the finale. And that is what I believe Hamaguchi and the team at Creative Studio 1 really mean when they say part 3 will really blow any expectation we have out of the water. It's a part that I believe will be even more mind-boggling than Rebirth, and really just go off the rails than ever before. I will say that at this point, if you're not enjoying the direction of the Remake series, I don't really think you're going to like part 3 either. We all know it's more of a reimagining than it is a one-to-one remake, and though I still have my own problems with the story, I have long accepted that this is just not the original, and that is completely fine. Rebirth also allowed us to travel to other continents and back seamlessly. We all know that Wutai will be a big part in the finale, especially with the roles they play in the remake. Just in general, having a lot more involvement with the story as well as their involvement with Avalanche. But not just the continent of Wutai, but a lot of the optional islands that are scattered around the world map in the original. I think there are infinite possibilities where part 3 can really just go wild with the optional content here and what you can find when you explore in the Highwind. Which, speaking of the Highwind, I would love to see if there were actual battle mechanics that came with the airship. Imagine just flying around in the Highwind and all of a sudden you have a random encounter out of nowhere. nowhere, and the party would then have to get up on the deck and fight them just like they would with the Ultima weapon in the original. Except instead of it just being an optional boss, it would just be a regular mechanic when flying around. The thought of having the high wind included in gameplay besides just getting you from point A to point B, I think would be one of, if not the coolest thing that modern FF has ever done. And even with the weapon fights, maybe they can find a way to incorporate the high wind in a way that can make sense when battling these gigantic enemies. They might even need to cook up a special battle system just for the weapon fights specifically, as I don't really see how the regular battle system will work on these type of engagements. I would imagine they would tweak the battle system in a way that feels natural when fighting the weapons and how you utilize your party members in order to take them down. Another Final Fantasy that they can most certainly take for inspiration was a game that recently came out, and that's Final Fantasy 16. The icon battles in 16 were absolutely insane, mixing in larger than life cinematic gameplay that had my jaw on the floor. And there were so many of them in the game, some of my favorite moments in video games in general. And I honestly believe that they can recreate that same amount of hype for the weapon battles in Rebirth. Seeing how fast Rebirth came out, it stands to reason that Part 3 will also follow that same trend. Or at least that is the hope. However, recently, Hamaguchi talked about Part 3 potentially going to Unreal Engine 5. If this is the case, that would mean that the development for the next game could be even longer. The thing is, transferring to another game engine can be a process, and sometimes that process can take a significant chunk of development time. The engine that the Remake series has been using is a heavily modified Unreal Engine 4. And it's because of this that Rebirth was able to come out so fast despite Square Enix's long track record of very drawn out game development cycles. It's also important to note that Rebirth does not have any downloadable content planned for the game leading into Part 3. And if this remains to be the case, it's possible that Part 3 could potentially release as early as 2027, especially if they stick to Unreal Engine 4. Though if they do come to find out that Unreal Engine 5 is an easy transition to make, I think it's pretty safe to say that they won't hesitate to take that chance to switch over. Otherwise, whether that ends up being the case or not will have to be seen. But I'm on the side of wanting to see this game out as soon as possible while retaining that same level of quality we have in Rebirth, and maybe even more. We'll see. The remake games so far have been absolutely great for the Final Fantasy series, and if Part 3 is going to be as mind-blowing as the developers say it's going to be, then I do think that this remake trilogy can be some of Square Enix's best work yet. But for that to happen, it really does have to stick the landing with this finale. With how good these last two games have been for the most part, I would say I really do trust Creative Studio 1 to get the job done. But tell me how you feel in the comments below. What are your predictions for the story, gameplay, and potential locations for Part 3? And do you think this finale will be as mind-blowing as the devs have led us to believe? If one thing is absolutely certain, there is a lot of expectation for this finale to stake the landing for one of the most iconic video games of all time.